It's good to have Dr. Gerald Horne, whose more than 60 books and hundreds of articles are rooted in activism, and whose seminal research methodology consists of necessarily applying the conjuncture of race and class to unearth the facts, to understand its origins as settler colonialist nation, to its economic, political, that is, plantation capitalism.
The true history of America, to enable us to recast the real opportunity to come to grips with it.
Need to understand the legacy of Martin Luther King and raise it up today as the storm cloud reaction in the form of Trumpism are about to deluge us with, oh, it's a hard rain that's gonna fall. Dr. Horne?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. We know it's yet another opportunity to focus on the triple evils of capitalist racism, and Pacifica Radio is uniquely qualified to comment on this important matter since over the decade, mass media voice keeping Dr. King's dream alive. This accidental. Recall that the former chair of the board of Pacifica Radio, the late Jack Odell, was once it was President Kennedy himself who took Dr. King into the Rose Garden of the White House in order to escape of the pugnacious, bulldog-like FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, in order to instruct Dr. King to get rid of Jack Odell. Why? The FBI thought that Jack Odell, once an activist as well within the once CP-led National Maritime Union, retained his radical affiliations while being a top staffer at Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. King agreed to get rid of Jack, but then kept subterranean ties to him, infuriating the FBI, which monitored the every move of these two men. And indeed, by April 1967, when Dr. King gave his well-known speech at Riverside Church in Morningside Heights near Columbia University, denouncing the war in Indochina, the FBI was further outraged by his anti-war message. This caused erstwhile allies in the NAACP to denounce him, and indeed, by the time of his April 1968 assassination, Dr. Black constituency was far from being ideal. And then, in February, he was to speak at Carnegie Hall in Manhattan at a fundraiser for Freedom Way editor, infuriating further repeated his now routine denunciation of the war in Indochina and racism occurring while he was in the midst of conceptualizing yet another march on Washington, which eventuated his efforts to uplift the question of poverty and homelessness. Speaking of Resurrection's Occupy movement, this time in Washington, D.C. But quite provocatively, at Carnegie Hall, Dr. Boyce, NAACP founder and father of Pan-Africanism, joined the communist. He was leaving for permanent exile case where he died in August 1963, just as Dr. King with his I Have a Dream speech. Quite provocatively, Dr. announced portentously that his belief in a socialist commonwealth should not detract from his genius and his career. Dr. King himself fell victim to an assassin's bullet in April 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, quite typically while in support of low-wage workers, sanitation workers in this case, committee headed by late Congressional Black Caucus member Louis Stokes of Cleveland, likely the result of a conspiracy. Intriguingly, the accused assassin, James Earl Ray, and after the murder, was seeking to escape to the racist regime of Rhodesia in southern Africa, today's Zimbabwe. However, it was not just Dr. King's denunciation of the triple evils of capitalist racism and militarism and poverty that contributed to his murder. Dr. Cornel West, a lineal descendant of Dr. King and their shared social democratic leanings, has reminded us of the day in 1964 when Dr. King, the founder of the Southern Christian X, also a victim of assassination, they were conferring about reviving the program of Paul Robeson, who brought the rulers of the United States on the dock, not least because of the reign of terror routinely inflicted on peoples of African descent. Recall that Robeson had done so in the early 1950s, the San Francisco-born attorney who went on to advise the Black Panther Party and lead the defense that freed Angela Davis in the early 1970s. Martin and Malcolm discuss reviving the still relevant matter of putting pressure on Washington and Wall Street by dragging both into the dock, especially the International Court of Justice, where thanks to post-apartheid South Africa just recently, a plausible case for genocide has been made out against the Israeli misruled Palestine. The We Charge General Patterson remains a bestseller in book form, signifying its continuing relevance. The profundity of Dr. King rests not only with his dedicated attempt to avoid political sectarianism, such as seeking to retain ties to Jack O'Dell, former Pacifica board chair, even after being pressured to cut ties by the president himself, or meeting with Malcolm when this leader too was being eviscerated by the high and mighty. Today, the message of Dr. King is more relevant than ever, not only because of his principled avoidance of political sectarianism, but as well because of his internationalism. The scheduling gods are seeking to convey a message to us by slating the MLK holiday on the same day that the Tangerine Tyrant is being inaugurated, with plans to initiate mass deportations as soon as tomorrow and pardons for the miscreants who sought to execute a fascist coup on January 6, 2021, in order for the tyrant to remain in power. I was struck by a recent article by 91-year-old Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister of Canada, who in rallying his compatriots against U.S. aggression against this northern neighbor, instinctively called out for internationalism as a weapon, for Canada to seek allies, and similarly challenge Denmark and Greenland and Panama. Unfortunately, he did not include Cuba in his list of potential global allies, but we should not make a similar mistake. I was heartened by the breadth of the delegation of Black Americans and allies who attended a recent conference in Havana, which included extraordinarily representatives from the NAACP. When in the dying days of the Biden administration, this now departed president was forced to remove Cuba from the so-called terrorist list, it was a sign that our mass pressure worked and that this support will pay dividends when we mount a case against our oppressors in the international community. Certainly, Dr. King did not ignore internationalism given his solidarity with Indochina, his frequent stays in Jamaica, his conferring with representatives of newly independent Algeria in Manhattan, his conferring with representatives of the African National Congress of South Africa in London, just to cite a few examples amongst many. This consistent internationalism of Dr. King reminds us of his adaptation of a quote attributed to his comrade, the late James Baldwin, i.e., did their ambition amount to integrating African Americans into a burning house? A burning house indeed of capitalist racism, militarism, and poverty. This was of a piece with Dr. King's repeated rebukes of the so-called white backlash against strides towards equality. This backlash being the progenitors of not only the attempted fascist coup of January 6, 2021, but the events of today, the inauguration of the Tangerine Tyrant with backing of about 77 million U.S. voters. Other than his internationalism, Dr. King's contributions included his trumpeting of working class organization. As aforementioned, to his dying day, he was in solidarity with the unions, especially black union members in Memphis. Dr. King said many times that his favorite union was 1199, the Hospital Workers Union, with historic headquarters on 43rd Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan. Full disclosure, I once served as a counsel for this union during my time as an attorney, I am proud to say. I'm also proud to report that this heroic union, now tied to the Service Employees International Union, has rejoined the AFL-CIO. Not a moment too soon, given the fierce gales organized labor is about to be subjected to in light of there being a new sheriff in town in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, our team will be on defense to a large extent in coming years. But as sports fans well know, a good defense can contribute mightily to a good offense. Another lesson that can be gleaned easily from the life and legacy of Dr. King, a life and legacy marked by internationalism, Black solidarity, and working class solidarity. Thank you for your attention.